Mr. Blees, a contractor has to do many things in order to operate a successful business. What about the importance of estimating?
Well, this business depends entirely upon estimating properly. Frankly, most contractors do not estimate properly. I have been testing the contractors over the country in meetings and individually. And they start from the wrong premise. And like anything else, if you start from the wrong premise, you'll probably come up with the wrong answer. And they make the mistake of really not understanding why you make an estimate. I say that you do not make an estimate to arrive at the selling price. And the contractors say right back at me, well, that's exactly why we do make the estimate. And I say, well, that's the mistake. You should make an estimate to arrive at the correct price that you should sell it for, based on your costs. And once you arrive at that price, you can do anything you want to. And I use an easy illustration. As you know, I fly a lot, over 250,000 miles a year doing this work. And I fly in jet airplanes. They go 600 miles an hour. Now, would you want to go out to the airport in Los Angeles with me tomorrow and get on a jet airplane if the pilot didn't even know he was starting from Los Angeles? I wouldn't get in the airplane. He doesn't know where he's going to fly. If he doesn't know where he's starting from, he might put us in the Pacific Ocean or the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic, or take us up in around the North Pole and kill us. And the contractor says back to me, well, what's that got to do with estimating? I say, well, before you start to fly, you better know where you're starting from. And so you must arrive first at the correct price that you should sell it for. And then after you know that starting point, you can fly north or south or east or west or up or down. And the pricing of that job, based on what you know now, will be determined by many factors. It can be competition. It can be the season of the year. It can be the condition of your business, whether you want the order. All kinds of things decide the selling price, but that isn't the way they do it. They're all pretty good on takeoff. That is, the content of the job is not far in variance. But when it gets down to marking it up, why, and then they don't have good accounting. They don't know their overhead. But they mark it up almost anyway to try to outfigure the competition to get the order. And when they get all through with the order, why, they couldn't make money on it under any condition. And then the contractor makes the mistake of going to his job file. And they'll check the job after it's all finished. And they say, well, I did better on the job than I estimated. So I made money on the job. But they didn't make money on the job. They lost money on the job because they marked it up so they couldn't make money on the job. Now, there's two danger points in estimating, two major ones. The equipment is not a danger point. They know what it's going to cost, and they can put it in the estimate. There is some danger, and can be if there's a lot of ducting or things like that in material, but not too much. But the danger point is in the labor, which they know better than I do, and the other one is in the markup. Those are very dangerous things to fool with. And the contractor that just marks up almost anyway to get the order never makes the money that a contractor does that knows what he's doing and estimates properly. If you would ask me in this case, how many of them make the mistake? I'd say 90%. Don't estimate properly. Well, how can a business be good if 90% of the people are starting from the wrong premise? Because even the man that knows what he's doing is in competition with the man that doesn't know what he's doing. If I could give the industry any advice, I would say that the most important thing would be to teach every contractor the right premise of estimating. Because the funny thing happens, when the man knows what he should sell it for, he sells better. He's stronger in his sale. And he won't give his money away as quick as the man that doesn't know and hopes that he's going to be all right. So I say that there's nothing in the business. Everything's important, but there's nothing any more important than estimating.
In a way, you're saying that an air conditioning contractor shouldn't cut the price before he arrives at the right price for him, right?
Yes.
He should get to the price that he has to sell for, then he can make up his mind if he wants to cut it.
And he shouldn't try to arrive at the price that he wants to sell higher either, anyway. It works both ways. I was in a big contractor about 10 days ago. His method of estimating was to take the job off, and then he marked up to get his overhead, but he made the usual mistake. His statement showed that his overhead was 17, so he marked up 17. Now, you can't mark up 17 and get 17 to save your life. You have to mark up pretty close to 21 to get 17. And this man is doing $6 million a year, whether you believe it or not. And he asked to see me because he'd only made $29,000. I don't blame him. I would have asked to see somebody long before he asked. And the first thing I looked at was first his books. His books were reasonably right, not 100%. And then, but when I saw the estimating, I really busted out laughing. I said, "Why, I don't have to go any further." This was within the first hour of sitting here talking to him. And then I didn't tell him what I'd seen. And then I handed he and his chief estimator a simple little order that I test everybody with and said, estimate it. And they make a 7% error in estimating. Now, if you make a 7% error in estimating before you even price it, why, on $6 million, you're making a $420,000 error before you even start. Well, how could he make money? Now, he said back to me, but I can't sell at the price I'm supposed to sell at. And I said, well, then you better do something about it. And I see this all over the country. I see it in little contractors, and I see it in big ones. And one of the things that I say that you men should do is to be sure that the dealer knows how to estimate. Now, let's take the labor problem. Labor is cutting these contractors two ways now. They're getting more pay automatically. That is, they've signed contracts all over this country for the next 3 years that's going to raise the labor pay. The contractors know this. But I've seen many a contractor with a wage increase that hasn't changed the way he estimates to get it. And then he wonders why he isn't making money. And he'll make an estimate on a job that's going to go over the next 6 or 8 months if it's a big job. And he hasn't made any allowance for inflation or anything like that. And he's spending his money. I don't know why I wouldn't do it with mine. I can assure you I would. And now the other way labor's cutting is that frankly, You're not getting an 8-hour day for 8-hour pay. I don't have to tell the contractors that. That's been on their mind, to my knowledge, for the last 7 years. They have been very disturbed that they pay for 8 hours, and they were getting around 6. But now they're getting 5.5 and 5. Now, if the contractor doesn't put in his estimate to compensate for that shrinkage of production, why, I don't know how I'd make an estimate accurately. You have to know the content of labor. We should know the labor content in every kind of a job. And we should find that out by what goes on in the field. We can't cook that up at the factory. And again, I find myself into standard accounting. Because if we had standard accounting, we could see in the dealer's operating statement exactly how much labor content went into the job. And the way we've got the accounting split up so we can tell what kind of a job it is. And we could pass that back to the contractors all over this country, and they would have a measuring stick. They wouldn't hit it exactly. But if we could bring them closer to labor content in jobs, why, we would increase the profits enormously in this business. And then we run into, on labor, we run into the method of even reporting the labor, which is badly handled in the field again. You've got to account for the time of the man. If you're non-union, these men, I watch them, they go to the work after they're on the payroll. That is, they take 30 minutes to go to the job. They take 30 minutes to come off the job. And they often, I see them leave jobs and go down to a supplier and pick up parts of some kind. I don't know how anybody would ever be able to control labor that way, because your estimate of that labor is usually made with the man on the job. Now, a contractor has to be very careful how he's supervising his labor to get the right content of labor in. Now, this isn't easy. Everything I've said to you today is very difficult to do. And again, it becomes necessary for us to help do it. And we haven't done that. The dealer hasn't let us do it, or the contractor. He has felt that he's running that business. He is. There's no question about that. But we can do so much to help. And in estimating, I'm repeating, if you start from the wrong premise, you're bound to end up with the wrong kind of an answer. So that is how I feel about it. If we could do nothing else and just straightened out the principle of estimating and had it done accurately, you will raise the floor of your industry. Now, I have contractors say, well, no matter how I straighten it out, if my competitor doesn't straighten it out, why, what good does it do? And I say, well, it'll do you an awful lot of good, because you'll know you're hitting yourself with a hammer, and you'll stop it. You won't continue to make the mistake if you're conscious of it. I once was eating lunch with Mr. Kettering, the head of our research department. And I told him, I happened to be running one of the big sales operations in General Motors. I told him that the trouble with business is that we make mistakes in business and we don't feel it soon enough. And I said, if we could invent something that would make a man know that when he was making a mistake, he'd quit it. And I said, the Lord made us that way. I said, the Lord built a body so that when we violate it, why, we know it instantly. For instance, if you hit your thumb with a hammer, your thumb says right now, don't hit me anymore. That hurts. And you quit hitting your thumb. And Mr. Kettering said, well, Bill, what are you driving at? Well, I said, I want you to invent a little device that we can hang on all the General Motors dealers. And every time they make a bad decision, instantaneously they throw up. on the desk or on the customer or on anybody. And he laughed and said, well, I guess that would work, wouldn't it? And I said, it sure would, and please invent it. Because our trouble is that we don't know we make the mistakes. And I say that to you in the contracting business. 45 years later, I say we don't know we're making these mistakes. And for some reason, everybody felt that nobody should tell the other one. And I don't think they felt they were qualified to tell. Now, I wouldn't be qualified to be sitting here talking to you if I hadn't seen over 1,000 contractors in their places of business, not at the factory, in their places of business, looking at thousands of jobs, estimating, and seeing the relationship of the estimating to their own costs. And again, I say every time that you put your finger on one of these weaknesses and you get a correction, not in your industry, in a contractor, that contractor makes more money. But it does indicate how much more money the whole industry could make. I think billions of dollars a year. Let me illustrate a point. One of the divisions that I work with has about 4,000 contractors that sell their product. Those contractors, I feel, and I know more about it than they do because I've seen more of the contractors than they have, that they must average around 10 mechanics, either in service or contracting, in those operations. An average of 10 mechanics in 4,000 contractors or 40,000 mechanics. Now, if we could save an hour a day by working together in those contractors, I know that the wage plus the overhead is at least $10. Now, how much money is it? It's $400,000 a day. And it's almost $100 million a year. And that can be saved anytime anybody in this business wants to go and save it. And that beats cutting prices. That makes it unsound for everybody. That's a better way of work, but it calls for close cooperation. The contractor willing to show how he estimates, my Lord, they were scared to death to show me that 7 or 8 years ago. I had one in Philadelphia tell me he had a secret way of estimating and that he wouldn't disclose it to anybody. But later in the conversation, I saw that he lost his shirt. And I knew that because the distributor had taken me to see him because he couldn't pay his bill. And I quietly told him that he better have a better way of estimating because that secret way was causing him to go broke. It was. So I got him to change. But up to that time, I don't think that man would have changed until he wet busted because nobody knew what he was doing. And he thought he was doing it right. He didn't mean to do it wrong. He just thought he was right. And I've seen these things all over. Now, don't get the misunderstanding. Everything I know that's good or bad about this business was taught to me by a contractor. I'm not an expert on contracting. I couldn't cut a hole or drive a nail to save your life or mine. But I'm like Vince Lombardi. He can't play quarterback as good as Bart Starr either. But he can see what Bart Starr does wrong, and he can tell Bart Starr, don't do that, Bart. And I say that's the function of the manufacturer and the distributor, to be sure that they're helping the contractor. And estimating is probably the most important, if I was trying to classify it as almost anything, because the business depends upon good estimating. And we do not have it in this industry.
why do you say that all contractors should keep their books alike?
Well, I think it's because we have such a difficult problem talking to each other about, for instance, our overheads. I ran into the problem very early. I hadn't been calling on the contractors over about 2 months, and I realized that this industry is largely set up from an accounting standpoint to satisfy an income tax statement. Many of our contractors depend upon the public accountant to give them a statement that they try to manage from. And they can't manage from the statements that I've seen. The bigger contractors know this. The smaller ones are doing the best they can. And when I found that no one seemed to understand the statements, which I had worked on, again, many, many years ago in General Motors, where we went to standard accounting, it was perfectly obvious that the industry needed standard accounting. And I liken that to the baseball game. If in baseball, if you didn't have standard accounting in baseball, how would you know who was winning and who was losing? And you couldn't have a league. Now, I go to association meetings. I usually will attend in a year 8 or 10 of them where they've asked me to talk to the contractors. And when I talk about overhead, there's many places in your business that you have an overhead. It isn't just one basket overhead. In the contracting department, you have an overhead, and in the service department, you have. And if you've got a sheet metal operation that's large enough to be accounted for separately, you'll find an overhead there. They're all different. And yet the average contractor speaks of his overhead as one overhead. In service, your overheads will run anywhere from 25 to 40%. And in the contracting department, they can be almost any size. I've seen contractors that were largely brokers that only have about a 4% overhead. But they really don't work. They just get a contract and then subcontract everything. There's only 2 or 3 people in the organization. That's particularly true in the big metropolitan area where you'll find these brokers. But the average contractor has to manage his business. And if he's going to manage each department, you've got to have the figures on it. And if you're going to train the department managers how to manage a department financially as well as how to do the mechanical work in the department, well, you can't do that without standard accounting because you have too many people to train. It's like any good accounting, but it is standard. And it divides the business up, if you want to, with no more accounting than you now have. The question is just doing it right. And if you have this kind of information, you can do what has been done in other contractors because you can locate where your problems are. With the average accounting, you can't. Now, these other contractors that I've pointed to here, one of the first things I did was to help them straighten out their accounting. And I don't want to get into the details of accounting particularly, but everybody in the business contributes to managing the business. And I wouldn't know how to train the bookkeepers and everybody else in this business without having a standard method of doing it. So the first thing that a dealer really requires, or a contractor, is to have good records. The important thing is that they're up to date. Many of these contractors get their statements once a year. Many get them every 6 months, and some every 90 days. And the ones that get them by the month, very often they're getting them 2 or 3 months late. Well, you can't manage a business after the game's over. You've got to manage all the time, every day. And this is one of our most serious problems. is the inability for you and me, if we're two contractors, to talk about the same thing, even though we're using the same words. I know many contractors that are influenced by others in the way they estimate or mark up, and the other contractor really wasn't talking about the same thing. And I've seen this happen so much. I think the whole industry should go to standard accounting. We have that in the automobile business. The automobile dealers, whether they're General Motors or Ford or Chrysler or American Motors, all keep books alike. They have the same accounts. They know what the gross profits are. They know what the service department costs. They know what the used car departments are. And they know the new cars. They know all about their business. Consequently, they manage it well. And as this business gets bigger and bigger, more and more is it going to be necessary to have standard accounting. You're going to have to depend upon department heads to manage. Your dealer who today tries to run his business by his close contact is going to lose contact. They already are. Many of these contractors are running into millions of dollars in volume, so they have to depend upon a department head to run it. And you have to have a method of checking a department and managing it. And I wouldn't know how to do it any other way. Management will determine their profit. You can sell high, and if you haven't got control of expenses and costs, you won't make money either. Again, we find ourselves in a combination of what has to be done. And unless we do get standard accounting, why, you're going to be struggling with these problems forever.
Bill, let me see if I've got two things clear. One, you want to differentiate between a tax-oriented accounting system as opposed to a cost or standard accounting system.
Yes.
So you have that. First of all, you want that. And then secondly, you want the type of records that you can give to your department managers as you grow so they know what to do with that part of the business.
Oh, I think you have to hold the department manager responsible. He's going to direct your labor, let's say, and if he doesn't know the effect from a money standpoint, he can be assured that the man's working 8 hours a day, especially, let's take sheet metal. When he's working right under his nose, he knows he's there. But if he doesn't know his costs, and if he doesn't know his gross profits, and he can't manage that department. And there has been a reluctance in the contracting business to teach department heads how to manage. It's a reluctance to tell anybody about the money you're making. And I don't think it's necessary to tell the service manager all about the company. I do think it's quite necessary to tell him all about the service operation. And good accounting separates, as I said before, these departments. And then you can train everybody. One of the things that is needed so much in this business is for the manufacturers or the distributors to understand what's going on in the dealer or the contractor's place of business. Because if they did understand, they can cooperate. And as long as they don't understand and don't know, they can't give much cooperation. Now, the contractors themselves are holding these association meetings all over the United States, all the time. And they're trying to find a way to make money out of this business. How to make it in the contracting business or the sheet metal business or the service business. And I don't know, when they hold these meetings and I see, like I see here, the figures consolidated and none of the books kept alike. Well, it reminds me of the hamburger joint, where the meat inspector comes into the hamburger joint and says to the owner, picks up the meat and rubs it through his fingers and says, "What kind of meat is this?" And the man that owned the place said, "It's 50-50. And he says, "50-50 what?" He said, "1 horse and 1 rabbit." Well, that's what you got all over the United States. You got horses and rabbits. You people are not talking about the same thing. And I say, go to standard accounting. And anytime you mention anything, why, you'll be speaking the same language. And when you do that, every single person can be trained.
Will it take any more people to in the office to accomplish a standard accounting system?
Not anymore. Everything that occurs in the business has to be put in your books. Now, by delaying the entries in the books, you don't save any time. In fact, you increase the time. And when you delay the entry, now you're making it impossible to manage. Again, if you're a baseball manager, supposing that at no time during the game did the manager know what the score was. He wouldn't know when to take a pitcher out. He wouldn't know how to manage the team. Now, many a contractor has got records that have been set up by a public accountant primarily for tax reasons, not for management reasons. As a result, the public accountant has performed his service, and that is he's got the book set up so that you could turn in a tax report and pay your taxes. But at no time during the year could you manage your business because the chart of accounts, the way the accounts are set up, make it impossible to manage. When I go into many contractors, big or small, the first thing I'll look for is how has he got his books kept? Because if they're not kept right and organized right, he's going to deal with the wrong information about his overheads. And how is he going to know how to mark up an estimate if he doesn't know what his real overhead is? You couldn't even figure a break-even volume from, I would suspect, probably 60 or 70% of the operating statements that I look at have to be reconstructed every time before I can tell a contractor how much volume he needs to do to make money. But again, we are confronted with the fact that the man started in business small and grew like Topsy. And his accounting came up with him. I think it's quite serious because if we don't manage well, we're never going to make the money.
Bill, I'd like to get back to the 6 basic essentials of this business and specifically start off with the consistent selling effort that you mentioned earlier.
Well, you know, it's the consistency with which you do things that make money. That is, you can know the 6 things that you have to do, but if you don't do them all the time, you don't make as much money as you would if you did them all the time. And an easy illustration is to go to a sport. Every time that you play golf, you've got to do all the things in golf that'll let you win. And incidentally, when you play golf, you try to do it better each time. And sometimes I don't think we try to do every day better than we did yesterday. Now, let's take a consistent selling effort. Well, a funny thing, the dealers don't understand that every contractor, in my opinion, except maybe a general, and even he should have and does have a selling effort of some kind. And the little add-on or residential dealer certainly has to have a consistent selling effort. or he won't get any volume, because that's the individual homeowner buying primarily on add-on, and even in the small commercial. Now, as I looked at the operating statements in this business, I found that the average contractor was spending about 1/4% for advertising, and that the only time that they really did any advertising was when the distributor or the company went to them and said, we'll have a advertising campaign, and if you'll participate in it, we'll pay half of it. And I say, what a way to run a business. If I were a contractor, I would want to have my own selling effort. I would know what I was trying to do. And how would I do that? Well, I didn't know, although I'd been in these other industries, and I know what they spend to sell the public. But I did finally figure out what I would do with my own money. And I say that's the important thing. Whatever you're asking another man to do, you've got to be sure that you would do it if you were in his position. Because if you're not sure of that, you're going to be unsound in your selling. And so I kept thinking, how much would I spend? This business is all different kinds of business. And these are my conclusions for what they're worth. If I'm going to sell plan and spec and the new construction of residences or apartment buildings, why, I'm only going to take 1/2% of my estimated volume and put it into my advertising fund. Now, how much is that? Well, it's only $500 on $100,000 worth of business. That certainly isn't excessive. But you can't run ads with those people and get anywhere. There is one thing you can do, though. You can publish a very fine book about your company that tells exactly what you're able to do, and in that little book that you would revise each year, you would show the work that you've done, and you would have the people that you did the work for saying, like in any testimonial advertising, yes, they put the installation into the shopping center, and it has been very satisfactory to all of the people who lease in the shopping center. And so I would take and spend money on that book. But let's take that 1/2%. How do you spend it? Well, you know how you spend it with a builder or with a general contractor. You may take him to dinner. You might go fishing together, just to keep an association that's proper. Now let's take the commercial business, where you're selling to commercial houses. How much should you put in your fund? Well, I say if I were in the business, I'd put 1%. In other words, again, if I was going to do $100,000, why, I would put $1,000 in my fund. And then if I was going to do add-on and that type of selling and small commercial, which requires different kinds of advertising, why, I'd use 2%. And if I was going to build a department, I'd use 3% of my estimated volume. And then on service, I would do the same thing, about 2% for service and even 3% if you're trying to build the operation. Now that fund I create myself. And then I say to my distributor, I want you to give me the co-op funds that you people provide on the equipment I buy. And you can check me to be sure that I'm spending on the basis of your co-op fund the 50% of it. But I want to have my own advertising campaign. I don't want to be dependent upon the distributor deciding he's going to run a campaign, because I know to keep my business operating and running properly, I've got to do business the year round. So I've got to plan the year round. Now, I know the average little contractor couldn't do this alone. And again, you find yourself in the position that I say. Ask for help from the distributor and the company to help you lay out such a plan. And I say the contractor makes a serious mistake when he figures that any advertising money that he doesn't spend is going to add to his profit. In my opinion, I think just like in a store, and I've had experience with the big merchandisers of this country, they wouldn't think of not advertising and trying to take that money and throwing it into profit, because they'll run out of profit. They'll run out of customers.
Bill, what you're saying here almost is that it's not an expense, it's an investment.
Well, and it has to be a consistent one. That's my point. Now, there's certain times of the year you couldn't get me to advertise in the newspapers, in the contracting business. When is that? Well, you couldn't get me to spend a nickel in advertising, that is in newspapers or that kind of advertising, between Thanksgiving and January the 10th. Now, why? Well, you're up against that Christmas trade, and you're just going to pour your money in there and waste it, because the people are not going to be thinking about it that way. But believe me, from January the 10th until June or July the 1st, almost the 4th of July, you're going to find me in there promoting my business in all phases of it. Very strong, pre-season and in that early season. But now, after July the 4th, you're not going to find me spending very much advertising in newspapers in July and August and up to Labor Day. Now, why? Because I got all the business I can do anyway. Why should I create a lot of prospects that I can't even call on? And I've seen contractors carrying in their pocket 15 telephone calls. And I took these slips out of one of them in Oklahoma, and some of those calls were 2 weeks old. I said, what are you carrying those around for? Well, he said, I've got to call them up and give them an estimate. And I said, well, they've already bought. Forget it. And so, again, even in handling a prospect, the speed with which you handle that prospect has a great determination on how you sell that job. And if you get there first and sell that man on the idea that he ought to air condition his home right, and then you warn him that another guy that is going to be able to say to him that he'll sell him the 3-ton air conditioning for $200 less, you've already got him in such shape that he's going to ask some questions about what the guy's going to do for $200 less. But if you get there after the fella's offered it for $200, the man doesn't hear what you're saying. Literally doesn't hear, because he's saying back to you, but mentally he's saying, but I can buy it for $200 less. He is not buying the same thing that you're talking about. And you have a terrible time making him understand that it isn't the same. And the most successful add-on salesmen I know are people who will cover a prospect promptly. And then another thing to remember, and that is that the installation is important. If you say, I can't install it for 2 weeks, you'd be far better off to go to overtime and install that thing at a higher price and pay the overtime to do it, because you'll make a lot more money, because you're going to pile that sale on top of your break-even point.
In this business, Bill, many contractors feel that it's not necessary to carry inventory. Now, I know that you don't agree with that, and why is it?
Well, in my experience in this business, I find that trying to coordinate the order by ordering from the distributor or the factory to get the equipment on the job, there's a large amount of labor loss. And the loss of that labor is very important to the contractor, the efficiency of labor.
Why do you say that?
Well, because if you carried your own inventory, and then when you make a sale, you can immediately know when you can make the installation. And it's comparatively easy for a contractor who has inventory of the fast-moving type of equipment to make promises that he can keep, and also use the labor very efficiently. I have been out and seen contractors that had orders from the factories on equipment that they should have been carrying themselves, that could not be delivered on time, and a great amount of labor has been lost by the contractor. I remember not long ago in New Orleans where I saw two mechanics waiting about 4 hours to get the equipment on the job. And I figure that a mechanic's time is worth about conservatively $10 an hour with overhead, and those two mechanics cost that contractor $80 because the equipment was not delivered promptly to the job.
You're almost saying that he could afford to pay for some of his inventory by control of labor.
Well, of course, it depends upon the kind of a contractor. If you're a big mechanical contractor and are having special equipment, you couldn't afford to carry that. But you certainly could carry the package type of equipment. And if you do that based on your own requirements, not upon what a company would want to sell you, but what you need to make money in your business, why, you'd be much better off to carry inventory. How much you should carry depends entirely upon your own setup, and each contractor is different. But if I were in the business, I would want to have on hand about 75% of my monthly requirements. Now, how would I know how much my monthly requirements are? That's what the contractor says. I can't tell what I'm going to sell. And yet I find that most contractors can tell if they will handle their business right. Not exactly. But if they did carry the inventory, they've got to have two things. They've got to have the money to carry it, and sometimes the contractor doesn't have the money, and he feels to borrow the money and carry inventory would be costly to him. As a matter of fact, that's not true, because the saving in labor would more than offset the interest. In fact, it'll make him a lot more money. Now, the second thing that keeps the contractors from carrying inventory is actually their physical facilities, their buildings. They don't have room to carry the inventory, nor have they planned to carry it. And as a result of that, they don't carry it. And I feel that by working together with the distributor and the factory and the contractor, that a sound way of carrying inventory can be developed with any contractor.
Bill, I'd like to be more specific here on this ratio of inventory to break-even point, for example.
Well, you know, I have advocated that every contractor know how much volume he has to do each month to make money. And again, going on my experience, I find that if a contractor needs to do, let's say, $30,000 a month to break even, why, he's got to do more volume than that to make money. But I would base my inventory on my break-even volume. And I find that in studying the business, about 1/3 of your break-even volume represents the equipment. So if I've got a $30,000 break-even volume, that automatically tells me about somewhere in the area of $10,000 or $12,000 would be the proper inventory for me to carry. Now, in addition to that 10 or 12,000, because I can't tell all the time exactly what I'm going to need, I would probably buy another 3,000 or 4,000 in a month, which I would order special. But 75% of my inventory I would have on hand on the first of the month. So I'd know that for the next 30 days I could plan my labor force very intelligently and keep control.
Which is probably the most expensive item that a contractor has to keep track of.
There's no question, Lou, that the biggest problem in this industry is in labor. And when you stop to think of the number of mechanics that are in the field working for these contractors that they're trying to supervise, which is very difficult for them. Let's compare it with our factory. A factory will have, let's say, 1,000 men in the factory that comes in there every morning and punches a time clock. And then when they leave, why, you can measure pretty well what production you've gotten. Now, the contractor, on the other hand, for a factory that's employing about 1,000 men, those contractors out there, if it's a national company, there'll be 2,500 of them buying products from that factory. And those 2,500, based on my experience in this business, would average out at about somewhere between 8 and 10 mechanics between service and installation per contractor. So you've got 25,000 of them out there. Now, 25,000 men that have to be supervised in jobs all over the country, not in a factory. They're out on job. It's very difficult to get the labor out of those people. And when you interfere with the labor by non-delivery or trying to coordinate it from an inventory standpoint, that is the equipment itself to get it on the job, why, you're doing a very costly thing as far as the contractor is concerned. And I just wouldn't do it. If I had my own money invested in this business, I would want to sit down and figure out exactly how much inventory I should carry. And once a month, along about the 20th or the 25th of the month, I know how many sales I've made this month. And I can pretty well estimate about how many I'm going to make next month. And I could order the equipment in the different models that I need and balance my inventory once a month. If I've over-ordered, let's say, on 3-ton equipment, why, I don't order any next month. But I get it there so that at the beginning of the month, I've got 75% of my requirements on hand in my own warehouse. And if I did it this way, and I've proven this over the country, I make a lot more money.
It seems that a contractor would also have a bit of insurance during the peak seasons, that he would have the equipment available and not be caught short like some of the others who don't stock inventory would be in.
Well, every merchandiser that sells goods knows that we have peak seasons. In the summer, we have peak seasons in the air conditioning business. And in the winter or late summer and going into the fall, we begin to have peak seasons on inventory requirements of the heating equipment. We can figure this out if we want to in business-like ways, like any other business does, and build up your inventories. Let's say starting in January, I would start building up my inventory knowing that my volumes in April and May and June and July are going to be much larger requirements than I'm going to have in January or February. I've seen some interesting things happen in this industry in the last 8 years that I've worked in it. When I first started working in it, the contractors were reconciled to losing money 4 and 5, even 6 months a year. And now I find that it isn't necessary at all to lose money in the air conditioning business. And you can make money any month if you build up your service operation and then promote your business properly during the year. And if you carry the inventory at the right time, why, you just make a lot more money out of this work. The trouble is, or the problem is, that the contractor doesn't have the money to carry the inventory, or he may not have the facilities to carry the inventory.
You said earlier, Bill, that most contractors don't like to carry inventory because it costs too much. Now, why do you say that it really doesn't?
Well, The contractors feel that if they carry the inventory, that they're going to have to pay interest. Now, I would much prefer myself to pay any interest that's necessary and pay cash for everything. Because when you take cash discounts, you will find that you can pay the interest and actually make money. I'll give you an example. Let's take this man that's going to carry $10,000 worth of inventory and get a 6 or 8 times turnover of that inventory. Now he's going to take cash discounts on $60,000 to $80,000 in the year, and he's only going to pay interest on $10,000. Now, usually there is a profit by taking cash discounts when you work it out properly and control your inventory. Not only is it makes money if it's worked out properly, but in addition to that, you do the other things that I've pointed out. You have better control of your labor, and you save, in my opinion, enormous sums of money by better utilization or efficiency of labor. And then another thing that happens with these contractors that carry inventory, they can make promises that they can keep. And in other words, they make the installations on time. My experience proves that installations made on time in an orderly way are always better installations and more profitable than those that are done under crisis conditions, as I say. So, to sum up, I wouldn't consider being in this business if I were a contractor without carrying the proper inventory for me, which I would be judging every month. And I would want the help of the territory salesman and the distributor and the factory in working this out.
Well, actually, Bill, inventory helps a contractor to save money in all areas and also to make money, right?
That's right.
Do you have any specific contractors that you've called on recently that you could use as an example?
Yes. I know many contractors over the country today that have completely changed their mind about carrying inventories because they have found these things that I've said to be true. And the only reason I advocate them is because they do make money. And I think about the business the same way as if I had my own money invested, what would I do? And I can assure you I would never be in this business that I didn't carry the proper inventory any more than I would do it in any industry. This is the only industry that I've ever seen that thinks it's smart not to carry inventory. But that's changing, and progress is being made. And I recommend, without qualification, the right inventories on hand all the time with the right contractor. But each one is different and has to be figured out individually.